The night Caleb finally agreed to go on a blind date was the same night he almost didn't. He sat in the driveway for 11 minutes, the engine off, the windows fogging slightly from his breath. The paper, with the restaurant's address, folded in half on the passenger seat, like he didn't already know exactly where he was going. He'd typed it into his phone 3 times that week, deleted it twice. They sat. His daughter had helped him pick the shirt. Hazel was 9. She had her mother's way of tilting her head when she was deciding something important. A slow, considering lean that made her look older than she was. She'd stood in his bedroom doorway that afternoon, studying him from across the room, and finally said, "The blue one. It makes your eyes look less tired." He didn't ask her what she meant by that. He was pretty sure he knew. So he wore the blue one. He drove across town, and then he sat in the driveway of a restaurant called Fern's and watched other people walk through the front door like it was the easiest thing in the world. His phone lit up. A text from his friend Dex. "She's already inside. Corner booth. Dark hair. You'll know her." Caleb stared at that last part for a long time. You'll know her. He wasn't sure anymore if he knew anyone. He wasn't sure he knew himself. The man who used to walk into rooms easily, who used to reach for his wife's hand without thinking, who used to believe that a life could be built and stayed. That man felt very far away, like someone he used to be friends with in college. He got out of the car. The restaurant was warm, the kind of warmth that hits you before you're ready for it. Amber lights. The smell of garlic and wood smoke. A woman at the host. Stan smiled at him, and he managed to smile back, and then he spotted her. Dark hair. Corner booth. She was looking down at her phone, not pretending to look casual about waiting, just actually waiting, in the straightforward way that some people manage to do without making it awkward. She had a half-empty glass of water in front of her, and a small paper napkin she'd folded into a triangle. Her name was Iris. Dex had told him that much. Iris. 38, taught elementary school on the north side, liked hiking and bad horror movies, and apparently made the best lemon cake anyone in their friend group had ever tasted. Caleb had nodded at each fact like he was taking notes and retained almost none of it. He'd been too busy figuring out how to talk himself out of canceling. He walked over. She looked up. "Caleb?" she said, and there was something in her voice. Not nervous exactly, but careful, like she was handling something she didn't want to drop. "Yeah," he said. "Iris?" She smiled. It rearranged her whole face. "I almost left 20 minutes ago," she said. "I'm really glad I didn't." He sat down across from her and thought, Okay, you're here." They ordered water, then wine. The menus came, and neither of them looked at the menus right away, because they were already talking, which was not what Caleb had expected. He'd expected silence and effort, and the particular strain of trying to seem like a whole person when you were pretty sure you were still in pieces. But Iris was easy to talk to in a way he hadn't anticipated. She asked him questions and actually listened to the answers. Not in the head nodding, waiting for her turn way. She listened like she was genuinely trying to understand. He found out he was a single dad within the first 10 minutes. He watched her face for the thing he usually saw, the slight recalibration, the invisible math, and it didn't happen. She just said, "How old?" And when he said 9, she said, "4th grade is the best grade. They're old enough to be funny, and young enough to still think you're cool. He laughed, a real one. It surprised him. I teach 3rd and 4th grade, she said. I have very strong opinions about this. That tracks, he said. She told him she'd been on exactly 4 dates in the past 2 years. She told him this the same way she'd have told him she'd been to 4 movies. Like information, not confession. He appreciated that. He was so tired of things being performances. I moved here after my mom got sick, she said. 3 years ago. Just meant to stay 6 months. And then, she shrugged one shoulder. Here I am. Is she? Shh. He passed. About 18 months ago. She said it without flinching, but there was a stillness in her afterward, the way a room feels after a door closes. It's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but I'm okay. They sussed. Caleb understood the distinction completely. Somewhere around the 2nd glass of wine, they started talking about the small things. The really small things, which, in his experience, were the only things that ever told you anything real about a person. She told him she had a rule about bookmarks. She used receipts, mostly, because real bookmarks felt too permanent and Post-its felt too casual. He told her he made pancakes every Sunday regardless of whether Hazel asked for them, because it was the one thing he could do automatically, without having to think. And on Sunday mornings his brain needed at least one automatic thing. He looked at him when he said that, not with pity, with recognition. What kind? She asked. Blueberry, usually. Sometimes chocolate chip if she's had a hard week. What counts as a hard week for a 9-year-old? You'd be surprised, he said. And then, because something about the evening had loosened something in him, her mom died 2 years ago, so some weeks are just harder than others. The table went quiet. Not the bad kind of quiet, the settling kind. I'm sorry, Iris said. Yeah, he wrapped both hands around his wine glass. Me too. He didn't try to fix it, or fill the silence with something cheerful. She just let it be what it was. And then after a moment she said, Hazel's a beautiful name. She named herself, he said. I mean, we named her. But she decided about a year ago that Hazel was who she was. Her given name is May. But she's very firmly Hazel. Iris smiled. Kids know things. They do, he agreed. Dinner came. They ate slowly. The conversation moved the way good conversations do. Not in a straight line, but in circles that kept widening, catching new things on each pass. They talked about the neighborhood where he'd grown up, which turned out to be one town over from where she'd spent her summers as a kid. They talked about the particular loneliness of grocery. Shopping for 2, when you used to shop for 3. Since Caleb said, and then immediately worried, was too much. But Iris just nodded and said, she knew that one. She still sometimes bought too much of everything because she'd been buying for her mom for so long. That'd sound. It was when they were waiting for the check that it happened. They'd been talking about music. Specifically about the strange comfort of songs you associate with people who are gone. How hearing them is both the worst and the best thing. How you can spend 3 minutes inside a memory so completely that the rest of the world disappears. And Iris said, in the thoughtful, half-to-herself way, that she said most things. There's a Norah Jones album that does that to me. My mom used to play it every Sunday morning, before anything else. Before coffee, even. Caleb's hands went still. He didn't say anything. He was aware of not saying anything, of holding very carefully onto the air in his lungs, because his wife had done the same thing. Sunday mornings, before the coffee, before Hazel was up, before anything. The same album, the same ritual. He'd woken up to it so many times that he could still hear it when the apartment was silent. He still heard it sometimes, not as memory, but as presence. Like it was just playing in a room he hadn't walked into yet. He must have looked strange, because Iris stopped.
"What?"
she said gently. "Nothing," he said, and then, "My wife used to do the same thing, exact same album, every Sunday." He paused. "She passed 2 years ago." That Iris was very still. "Nora Jones," she said quietly. "Come away with me." Yeah." A long moment passed. Passed. The kind where the restaurant kept going around them, glasses clinking, a burst of laughter from somewhere near the bar. A waiter walking past with a tower of plates, and the two of them just sat in it. "I think," Iris said finally, "that means we're both a little haunted." She wasn't smiling exactly, but her voice was soft. In probably a normal amount of ways. He exhaled. It had been a while since he'd exhaled like that. Fully, like setting something down. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." She reached across the table and touched the back of his hand. Fingers, over knuckles, and then she pulled back and picked up her wine glass, like nothing had happened. And everything had happened, which he was beginning to think was exactly her way of doing things. They stayed. They stayed another 40 minutes after the check came. He walked her to her car. It was cold enough to see their breath. Listen, Beth. She had a blue coat that was slightly too big for her, and she pulled it closer against the wind. And he thought, without meaning to, that she looked like someone who had learned to carry extra weight without complaint and had gotten comfortable with it. "Thank you for staying," she said at her car door. "I know that wasn't. I know it takes something, showing up for things like this." "You too," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I'd like to do this again, if you want." No pressure. Just she paused. I'd like to, he said. She smiled. Got in her car. He stood in the parking lot until her taillights turned the corner. He set it down. On the drive home, the city looked different. He wasn't sure how to explain it, even to himself. The same streets. The same lights, going yellow, red, green. The same 22-minute route he'd driven 100 times. But something had shifted, the way a room shifts when you rearrange one piece of furniture. Everything is where it was, except the light lands differently now. He got home at 10:15. The babysitter, a college girl from down the street named Tess, was on the couch watching something on her laptop, and she looked up when he came in and gave him the eyebrows. "How was it?" she whispered, so as not to wake Hazel. "Good," he said, and then, surprising himself, "Really good." Tess grinned. He paid her and let her out and stood in the hallway for a moment. In the quiet, he checked on Hazel. She slept the way she always did, sprawled out, like she'd been dropped from a height, one arm off the edge of the mattress, the covers kicked to the foot of the bed. He pulled the blanket back up over her. She didn't wake. She never woke. He stood in the doorway a moment longer. He'd been thinking, since Iris's hand on his, about something Hazel had said to him about 3 months after her mother died. They'd been at the kitchen table eating cereal. It was a Saturday, early. And Hazel had put her spoon down and looked at him with that particular seriousness she carried, the seriousness that sometimes made him feel like she was the older one, and she'd said, "Dad, are you going to be okay?" He'd said yes, of course. He'd said it the way parents say things. But she'd looked at him for another beat and said, "I mean, for real." He hadn't known what to say. He'd reached across the table and covered her small hand with his and said, "I'm trying, Bug. I really am." He'd nodded, seeming to accept this. She'd picked up her spoon again, and then she'd said quietly, looking at her cereal, "Mom would want you to try." He hadn't been able to answer that one. He'd just squeezed her hand and looked out the window. Standing in the doorway now, watching her sleep, he thought about that. He thought about Iris, folding a napkin into a triangle. He thought about the Norah Jones album. He thought about coincidence and the way certain threads seem to run through people's lives in parallel, never touching until one day they do. He didn't know what to call it.
That is tip.
He wasn't sure it needed to be called anything. He went to the kitchen and made himself tea. He sat at the table where he and Hazel ate their cereal. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling like something looking for something. The apartment settled around him. The refrigerator hummed. He opened his phone. He had Iris's number now. They'd traded them in the parking lot, which had felt both ordinary and significant, which was probably how most important things felt. He didn't text her, as it was late, but he looked at her name for a moment, the way you look at a door you're not ready to open yet, knowing it's there, knowing it's real. Then he set his phone face down on the table, wrapped both hands around his mug, and sat with the quiet for a while. It wasn't the absence of grief. He wasn't naive enough to believe that an evening could undo 2 years. He still missed his wife in the specific, physical way that people don't talk about enough. Missed the weight of her next to him. Missed the sound of her moving through the apartment in the morning. Missed the way she laughed at her own jokes before she'd finished telling them. But grief, he was learning, was not a room you left. It was a room you learned to live in. You rearranged the furniture, you let in some air, and sometimes, on a Thursday night in a restaurant called Fern's, you met someone who was living in a room of their own. And for a few hours the walls felt less permanent than they had before. He finished the tea. He rinsed the mug. He turned off the kitchen light. In Hazel's room, she had shifted in her sleep and was now curled on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek. He stopped in the doorway again on his way to bed. He always stopped twice, a habit he'd never examined, and looked at her for a moment. She was the bravest person he knew. She had just kept going, every morning, and she'd never made him feel like his grief was too large. And she'd asked him if he was okay like it was the most natural thing in the world to ask, because to her it was. He thought, "I'm trying, Bug. I really am." And tonight, for the first time in a long time, trying felt like enough. He turned off the hall light and went to bed. And somewhere across town, in a parking garage, 3 blocks from a restaurant where a folded napkin triangle was probably still on a table waiting to be cleared, Iris was most likely doing the same thing, sitting in the ordinary silence of her own life, in the particular way that people sit when something has just shifted. Not completely, not finally, but in the small, real way that beginnings actually begin. I keep thinking about those 11 minutes Caleb spent sitting in that driveway. Engine off. Paper folded on the seat. Not because he didn't know where he was going. He'd typed the address into his phone 3 times that week. But because knowing where to go and being able to make yourself go there are 2 completely different things. That's the part nobody talks about. We celebrate the outcome. We talk about the date that changed everything. The person who showed up at the right moment, the coincidence that felt too precise to be accidental. But we skip over the 11 minutes. We skip over the 11 minutes like they're just a delay, like they're just fear to be powered through. I don't think that anymore. I think the 11 minutes are the whole thing. What Caleb did, what actually took courage, wasn't walking through the door of that restaurant. It was sitting in the car, feeling every reason not to go in, and going in anyway. Not because he was confident, not because he'd healed enough, not because some part of him had decided he was ready. He wasn't ready. He just went anyway. That distinction matters more than I used to think it did. There's a kind of intelligence in that choice that, I don't think, gets enough credit. It's not book intelligence. It's not strategy. The quiet wisdom of knowing that the only way through grief, through loss, through the particular loneliness of learning to live smaller than you used to, is to keep making contact with the world. Small contact. Real contact. Real contact. A corner booth, a glass of water. A woman who listens like she actually means to. Iris wasn't a solution to Caleb's grief. That's the thing I find most honest about this story. She didn't fix him. She didn't replace what he'd lost. She just sat across from him and was a real person. With her own losses, her own too big coat, her own receipts used as bookmarks, and for a few hours, 2 people who were each living in separate rooms of grief cracked a window open. That's all. That was enough. And the character it took to do that, on both sides, is the kind you don't build overnight. You build it through the mornings you got up when you didn't want to, through the Sunday pancakes made on autopilot when the apartment was too quiet, through the times you chose honesty over performance, chose showing up over staying safe. Caleb built it. Hazel, 9 years old, and already asking her father if he was okay for real, was building it too. That's what I take from this. Not that love finds you when you least expect it. That's too neat, too fortune cookie. What I take is simpler and harder. The shape of a life is made of the small choices, the quiet disciplines, the willingness to keep showing up even when showing up costs something. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone on the other side of the table has been doing the same thing, and for a little while, sitting in the ordinary light of a Wednesday night. That's enough to make the walls feel less permanent. Caleb drove home and looked at her name on his phone and didn't text her because it was late. That detail undoes me every time. He wasn't dramatic about it, he just waited. He was patient with himself. I think that's the whole lesson. Right there in one small act. Be patient with yourself. Keep going. Leave the door open.